I tell people you are not healthy until you're mentally healthy, and I talk about mind, body, and spirit. And you know the one I said first, mind. If I have a mother, she's in an abusive relationship, her husband's an alcoholic and drug user, she has some mental health issues and starts using drugs, and they got 2 kids, he gets incarcerated, and we go in and take her 2 kids away from her, what happens to her? And I also had a brother-in-law that was a Vietnam vet that just struggled with mental health, and he sat down in his kitchen one day and killed himself. And I kept thinking, why? We got to convince people, just don't use drugs. I mean, don't ever try it. Don't ever experiment with it. Your life will be much better. Be careful about addictive behaviors.
Senator Burgin, thank you for being here. I really appreciate the conversation and everything that you're doing across many different sectors, but specifically in mental health. I know that we met a few months ago for the first time, and I wanted to share just a quick story from my perspective about that. I speak with a lot of senators, and when I have the meetings, there's clearly this air of there's a lot of important stuff that they've got going on. Usually you get rushed out of the room, and the first thing that you said to me when we started talking was, and I told you that I was focused in mental health. You actually asked me about my experience, and you asked me about my experience with an eating disorder and what that was like. And I'd never actually had that experience with someone in your position. And so I'm not surprised that someone with that level of care that you would give a stranger in your office, the attention around mental health. I'm not surprised that you are the man behind North Carolina's huge investment of $835 million and more in mental health. Along with Secretary Cody Kinsley, you have been the leader in the state in trying to push the state forward. You've said that you're on a mission to make North Carolina the healthiest state, and I think you're well on your way. I want to ask you, what was the first moment that you realized that something needed to be done in the state with mental health?
It actually goes back a number of years. I served on a hospital board in Harnett County, and we had a 25-bed mental health facility. And talking to the folks and looking at the folks that came in and out of that facility, what I discovered were we had a lot of people coming back regularly. They would get out, they would get treatment, get out, and they would call them yo-yos and ping-pongs. They would be bouncing back and forth and coming back. And that's just not good. I mean, I'm a long-term solution guy. I think that, and I'm a businessman, and I tell people I don't spend money, I invest money. And I saw what we were doing as not being a good investment. So that just kind of started me on a mission. And I also had a brother-in-law that was a Vietnam vet that just struggled with mental health, would be on and off medications, and it had gotten bad, not physically, but the part of it had gotten so bad that my sister and my niece had moved back in with my parents because of his activity, and he sat down in his kitchen one day and killed himself, took a gun and killed himself. And I kept thinking, why? And is there something that I could have done or we could have done to make that not happen? So I've always been curious about things. I've always thought, is there something that I or we as a group can do to make people's lives better and more enjoyable? And as a person of faith, I'm a Christian, and I believe it's a biblical mandate for us to serve our neighbors. It says to treat your neighbor as yourself. And I think I gave you one of these. I give away these Pray First bracelets all the time, and I just think that we need to do whatever we can so people can have a full, joyful, productive life. And so that was kind of the overall how I got here.
And when did you feel like it was the state's responsibility to take greater action towards solving some of these problems across the care continuum of mental health?
Well, I was county commissioner for 8 years, and we did a lot of things with Daymark and other providers in the area, and I saw that same thing, repeat of services, but not a lot of long-term correction. and I kept, the more I got into it, the more people that I ran into that were doing it. And then when I got elected to the Senate and came up here, one of the things they ask you is, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? And I said, well, healthcare, because of my background in insurance and healthcare, and being on a hospital board. Governor McCrory had appointed me to the SHIC, which is the State Health Coordinating Council. So I was on that for a number of years, and just as I look back, all the things that I had done had said you need to be involved in healthcare, and then I started thinking, what's the one thing that I see that people struggle with the most right now, and it's mental health. So that was kind of how I got there. So I went to Senator Burgin, and I said, because we had these conversations, and I said, I want to be involved in healthcare, and I want to talk about mental health. And he said, well, nobody else is doing that right now, do it. And so he's been very encouraging to me.
I think it's really interesting that you've been such a big champion, and this in many states is a partisan issue. Across partisan lines, there is more support for school-based health than others. There's more investment in mental health than others. This is not a partisan issue in the states, bipartisan. What do you think, in your experience, has set the state up to have so much bipartisan support for better investments in mental health?
Well, a number of us were working on it before, and as I mentioned to you earlier, Secretary Kinsley and I went on and he tells everybody it was my idea, but he was quick to join on. I said, let's do town halls across the state and talk about mental health. And he said, yeah, let's do that. So we did 14. We traveled all over the state. We drove, flew, just went everywhere in the state to have conversations about mental health. And we would talk for maybe 5 minutes, and then we would just tell us your story. Tell us, how are you getting services? Are you getting services? What are the pitfalls to services? What do you struggle with? Can you find a provider? And we just listened. And a book I read a long time ago called Appreciative Leadership says effective leaders lead with their ears. And so we talked about the fact that we just needed to listen to people. And most of the time, if there's a big problem, if you talk to enough people, they'll tell you what the solution is.
Yes, they will.
I tell folks as a senator, I don't come up with the great ideas. I'm always thinking about what to do, but I get great ideas just talking to people, talking to you, talking to other folks. We get great ideas. But let me go back to the $835 million. I was just a part of that. People like Donnie Lambeth from the House was integral in. Donnie pushed for that. And none of that would have happened without Medicaid expansion, because Medicaid expansion gave us the bonus money to be able to do that, the $1.7 billion of which we took. I wanted to do $1 billion to mental health. I said, that's sending a message to everybody. We ended up settling out at $835 million, which is still a big number. But I talked to the governor about it. I talked to Cody about it. I talked to Donnie about it. I talked to Phil Berger about it. And I said, I want us to spend $1 billion on mental health. And but I'm pleased that we got $835 million.
What were those internal conversations like?
Well, I think everybody in our caucus, everyone in the House, all had somebody that had an experience with mental health, either in their family or in their immediate family or in their close circle of friends. So everybody knew that there something needed to be done. The biggest problem with mental health is nobody really knows.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the two ways that most people have their mental health needs met with are either through some law enforcement action, interaction with law enforcement, and or being admitted, involuntary committed to a hospital. And both of those ways are not the best way to get involved in mental health and mental health recovery and mental health therapy. So that's what we're working on now is how do we make sure we've got places where if someone is having a crisis, they don't go to the hospital and they're not arrested to do that.
I very much resonate with the story of going to the 14 town halls and that being the way that you identified the problem, and I'm sure the way that led to the roadmap for the set of solutions across the state. I think in my experience, any good product idea I've ever had has come from talking to the people that you're actually building for. What was like the most maybe unexpected thing that you learned on that town hall journey? I mean, there's lots of stuff that I'm sure you learned that we've even talked about, off camera. Kids and people staying on IVC way too long, not enough inpatient beds, people ending up in the ER unnecessarily, the law enforcement, et cetera. What was something that you didn't expect to learn that you learned?
That a lot of young people have a sense of hopelessness right now.
Yeah.
And that a lot of young people are struggling. I have 3 millennials, and so we talk a lot, and then now I have 4 grandchildren, and as I've talked to folks and talk about, I know how I was brought up and what I was involved in, and as I was telling somebody about an hour ago, I've grew up without cell phones. My wife and I traveled all over Europe and other places without phones. I mean, I'm before phones. I told you I've got my first bag phone that's in my office, and I show it to the Senate pages when they come in and talk about it. So it's just a different time, and I think we're forcing our kids to grow up too quick. We're giving them too much technology. I am a proponent for kids not having technology till they're 12 or 14 years old. We need to let their minds just wander and let their imaginations grow. And me and Michael Lee introduced a bill to take the phones out of schools.
Yeah.
And I had the creator of the Yonder pouch in my office a couple of weeks ago. And if you want to see him, he sent me a kit with the Yonder pouches. These are the pouches that lock. They use them at concerts and everything. And we've started it about 3 or 4 months ago in 4 high schools in Harnett County. All the other schools want to do it now.
Yeah.
And the kids are telling the teachers and their parents how much they're enjoying not having a device with them all the time.
Yeah, I read a study about that, and it was the first 3 days were awful. Everyone was complaining, everyone was frustrated, and then by the second week, everyone was talking to each other in class. They were having a fun time.
It's the same story everywhere I go. I mean, the first week is the hardest. And then after that, they're saying, this is pretty neat.
Yeah.
My mother's not texting me every 10 minutes. And I tell parents, it was real funny when we were doing the town halls. I'd talk about phones because it's always been a big thing to me. And I'd have parents say, oh, well, what if there's a shooting, or what if this happens, or I need to be able to get a hold of my child. And I'd talk to them about it. And it's a term that I'd heard, and I don't know where I heard it. I wish I'd have made it up. But it said, parents have gone from being helicopter parents to lawnmower parents. They're right down on the ground, and they're trying to clear the way for their kids so that nothing could ever go wrong. And that's not what life is about. I mean, you think about your life, and I tell folks the things that I've learned the most are the things that cost me the most.
Yeah.
Things that I've learned the most from are the things that cost me the most. In your journey, you talk about it. You learned a lot from it. You overcame it. That's what maturity and growth and everything's about is being exposed to do it. And if somebody does it for you all the time, you'll never experience it.
Yeah, I mean, you're a parent of 2 and 4 grandchildren. Is that correct?
I've got 3 children.
3 children
and 4 grandchildren.
4 grandchildren. So that's a lot of raising going on in the Burgin family. Why do you think parents have this fear mindset around their kids today? What do you think has caused that?
The drive for all of our kids to be successful. Everybody wants their child to be on every team and to be first in everything, and there is this real competitiveness. All of us have it, and all of my grandkids, all my kids played sports. All my grandkids are playing sports. I was at a ball game night before last for the 10-year-old watching her play, and we want our kids to succeed, but everybody's got to understand that kids need to learn how to fail and overcome it. They can't be perfect at everything.
Yeah.
And I think we set a lot of kids up for disappointment and failure and mental health crisis because we just need to love them and let them be kids and let them grow up. And that's why I think devices are just, the kids are being exposed to way too many things too early now.
Yeah.
And I had a parent that told me the other day that her 12-year-old daughter was shown porn by another 12-year-old at school on her iPhone, and I said, that's just a hard thing because I've got a 12-year-old granddaughter, and I just can't imagine somebody showing her another kid showing her porn or anybody showing her porn.
Yeah. I mean, how do you think then about, as a culture problem, that's not, it's a culture of parents and their belief about what it means to be a good parent and what it means to raise, good kids, quote unquote. That's a very different problem from how do we keep kids out of the ER for, mental health, crisis, linked very tightly because, if you allow kids to maybe struggle less by, having parenting that is less, as you call lawnmower parenting, in theory that causes less strain on the actual mental health system. But how do you think about that problem of parenting, culture, et cetera, as a set of problems to solve when we're talking about making North Carolina the healthiest state?
The only way we're going to be the healthiest state is we got to start at conception. I tell folks, you let me make sure that a woman, as soon as she finds out she's pregnant, we make sure that she goes to doctor's visits, that she starts on the proper prenatal vitamins, that she doesn't smoke or drink, and she eats healthy, understands the importance of rest and all of those things, and get her through a successful pregnancy, and then monitor that child, get them through the first 3 years of life, and then get them to third grade and make sure they're a great reader, we'll have a successful outcome. I went on late last year, I went out on death row to interview 3 death row inmates. And because I was just curious. I've been there once before, but I had asked, and it took me months to get them to agree to let me do it because I didn't have an alternative. I mean, I didn't have any kind of I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was trying to learn some stuff. And so the secretary agreed and worked it out with his people. So they took me into a conference room and actually brought them in one at a time. And I got to spend, I don't know, 2.5, 3 hours there. And got to talk, had their attorney with me so that everything was, exactly right. And I learned something from talking to those 3 men, and one of them had been on death row for 28 years. He was 76 or 78 years old. He has since died. He died last month from cancer. But what I learned from those 3 men is all 3 of them did not have a biological father in their family. 2 of them didn't even know who their father was. All of them had limited education. And all of them got involved in alcohol and drugs at about 12 years old. And marijuana was the drug they started with, and alcohol. They went in through the juvenile system. They got into more serious things. They all eventually, because of drugs and drug-related issues, ended up murdering people. And one of them was involved in the murder of 3 people. I think that if we collectively, society, had intervened in their lives early on, not one of them would have been on death row. So I say, we need to be working on a bunch of things. We need to be working on early childhood, making sure that kids have opportunities, that they are in stable homes, and I'm real concerned about our foster care system right now, and we're working on that. We're going to be working on a bill week after next on that. And I'm real concerned about our incarcerated folks, because we have 31,000 people in our prisons and about 18,000 in our jails. Wow. And 97% of those people are going to get out one day. And if we don't treat them while we have them incarcerated, they're just going to be right back on the street. And that makes just as much sense as taking somebody, and let's just say that you had something wrong with you. You had cancer or whatever, and you need to go to the hospital, and I put you in the hospital, but I never treat you. I just let you stay there, and you either get better and I put you out, or you die there. And we don't need to be doing that to folks. We need to, I tell them, we have a captive audience. We need to be making sure that we treat them. Now, there's some people that I think don't need to be in society, and we need to determine who those are and keep those folks incarcerated. But that 97% people that get out, I want them to be the best they can when they get out.
Yeah. And I think the experience that you had talking to those men on death row is very clear that the social impact of experiences that lead to the decisions that people make, and having people set up with very potentially even small interventions early on in life can
That's exactly right.
drastically change the impact.
One thing can change the total outcome of somebody's life. And I just came back to you. You're the perfect example. I mean, you changed your life, and other people impacted you and helped you, and all of us do. But I look back on my life, and I'm exactly where I am because of great parents. I tell folks I don't believe in gambling, and I don't buy lottery tickets. I just think I think it's another addiction, and when we're hurting the poorest people among you. But I tell folks I won the lottery because I was born into a two-family home. My parents were married for 69 years. They were great parents. My mother stayed home. I'm the youngest of four. She stayed home with all of us till I was 13 years old. And, Dad worked really hard so she could do that. And they kept us involved in church and activities. And, I never went to bed hungry, and I never was abused. So, I'm a product of a wonderful, loving family, and I want that for everybody.
Yeah. How much of that drives you to give that to everyone?
Yeah. I want everybody to experience what I had and what I still have.
Talk to me about, you mentioned foster care. I think it's really interesting. There's a lot on the horizon in the state for foster care. You've got the CFSP coming out. Tell me more. What's the vision for foster care? What needs to happen?
We need to foster care. We've got about 14,000 kids in foster care. We're down to about 3,400 or so foster care families. I want us to have about 10,000 foster care families across the state, and I want to make sure a child never sleeps in an office or a hotel or anywhere. We want kids in homes where people are there that'll love them, and then we got to do something about the termination of parental rights. We let kids languish too long in foster care. To me, a perfect situation was if we have to take, and foster care, removing children from a home should be the very last resort. What I want us to do is to put the whole family in foster care first, because a lot of the reasons that kids end up being removed from homes is because the parents mentally and physically can't take care of them. Some of it's abuse, but a lot of it is the parents are struggling to take care of themselves. They can't take care of their kids, and a lot of it is mental health and drug use. So if I have a mother that has, she's in an abusive relationship, her husband's an alcoholic and drug user, she has some mental health issues and starts using drugs, and they got two kids, he gets incarcerated, and now she has two kids and some issues, and we go in and take her two kids away from her, what happens to her? She's going to spiral on down.
Yeah.
I mean, she's already struggling. So I want to take her and those two kids and put them in family foster care where they've got loving people around them who'll make sure the kids are taken care of, educated. I want to put her into therapy and treatment. And then I want to take Medicaid dollars, and I've lobbied for this in Washington, and Secretary Kinsley and I've talked about it, and he's pushed for it. I want to take Medicaid dollars and get her a community college education and pay for child care for her for 2 years while we get her that education so that she can take care of herself and her kids. And I don't think we should ever expect to leave people on a government program the rest of their lives. I think that is the worst thing we can do for people, is to put them on Medicaid or any program and just leave them there.
Yeah.
And today we've got about 3.1 million people on Medicaid because of expansion, and with expansion, we're over about 660,000 new people on Medicaid, and we won't even be at the 2-year mark until December.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine, Dr. Andrei Ostrovsky. He was the former chief medical officer of the U.S. Medicaid program, and I saw him give a talk, and he said something that I never really understood, but that was so obvious and apparent about the safety net, right? The safety net that the state provides is a safety net. It's supposed to slack in times where things are good, and it's supposed to expand in times where people need. And I think COVID was a big example of a time where the safety net needed to increase, right? And it sounds like, even in you speaking, the safety net is not meant to catch people and keep them in the net forever. It's meant to catch and rebound people out of the net so that they don't need.
I don't want to have a safety net. I want to have a safety trampoline.
Love that.
and where when people fall, and people are going to fall, but when people fall, they bounce, and we catch them. Even if you fall pretty high on a trampoline, you don't get hurt. It might scare you to death, but you don't get hurt. but it's not really even those, when you fall into those nets, yes, they save you. But if you watch somebody try to get out of one of those nets, like if at a circus or something, the trapeze people, when they fall into the net, they have to drag themselves up and flip off to get out of it. And so really the safety net becomes the trap.
Yeah.
And we don't need that. So I had not even thought about it till you said, I'm going to use that more, a safety trampoline. That might be I might coin that.
You can have that. That's great.
If you use it, now you have to give me credit.
I'll give you credit for that one. I think it's really interesting, and it's a total reframe of like what we're trying to do here. I guess you seem like somebody who has a very strong sense of your own values, your own ethics. You clearly value the way you were raised, and you want to give that to other people. And I think anytime you talk about a safety net or trampoline, and I think with mental health specifically, there is this risk that you identify with the thing that's happened to you. It's sometimes hard for me not to say I have an eating disorder or I am someone with an eating disorder, but that I experienced an eating disorder. And I sometimes wonder if it's no different for somebody who is on Medicaid. I've never been a recipient, but I imagine that when you put the title on yourself, it actually becomes harder to get out, and it becomes harder to change the narrative around who you are to be able to use the trampoline to get out. And so how do you think about the balance between, we want to get people set up with the right supports so that way they don't have to stay here forever, with also, I think, the unfortunate reality that if you look at any substance use intervention, people who do not want to get better don't get better, right? You have to kind of hit rock bottom. You have to want to do the intervention. So how do you think about the maybe the word is the responsibility that individuals have for taking care of their own selves and their lives, with how do we actually set them up to do so?
And I thought a lot about it, and I've talked to folks in Washington about it. Secretary Kinsley and I have talked about it, and a lot of folks about, do you limit government services? Do you say, going in to tell people from day one, you can only be on this program, or you can only live in this facility, or you can only do this for this amount of time? And people in Washington explained to me real quickly that you can't kick people off of a government program. And I said, I don't really want to kick them off, but I want to help them get off and provide these wraparound services, whether it's education, childcare, housing, all of those. But what I've found is if you make it easy for people and you take care of all their needs, there's a tendency for some people to want to stay there. They get comfortable. And I don't think we can let people be comfortable in a position that's not the absolute best position for them. And I think part of that is education and early education, early intervention. I know that we have about 500,000 people that have been on Medicaid for more than 10 years. And I think any government program that traps people in it, we need to look at. I'm all for taking care of children, the disabled, and the elderly, and I want everybody else to work. And a lot of people that are on Medicaid are working, they're underemployed, and that's why I think this whole thing about getting them education, entry-level jobs are for young people and students and all that. We've got too many people that are trying to live on entry-level jobs. And people say, well, we need to raise the minimum wage, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to make sure. And I keep telling them that that should never be an issue, because in my businesses we have about 340 employees. If we hire somebody, if they stay at the pay that we hired them at after 30 days, there's something wrong. We use entry-level pay just to see who's going to show up and who's going to have a good attitude.
Yep.
If they show up and have a good attitude and work hard and all that, they're going to succeed, and we're going to pay them. And I think most employers are like that. I don't think there's many employers that hire people that say, I'm going to keep you, I'm going to hire you at minimum wage, and I'm going to keep you there the rest of your life. Because if they are, they're not going to stay in business long. Yeah.
I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, because I know that other than mental health, AI is something you're very excited about.
Yeah. But it does involve mental health and healthcare.
Well, and education.
Education.
I think outside of healthcare and mental health, like I have seen in my own personal experience with these tools, just the most radical and profound ability to learn in a way that even 4 or 5 years ago, I felt like I didn't have the ability to do. And just to have these sort of tools that are very crude at doing it, but to have a personal tutor along any subject that you could even imagine get you well past proficient. I think there is now this sort of same thing, onus on the individual to, one, know the tools out there, but then to be able to have the value of the importance of doing so. And I'll give you an example. I have a good friend that I went to college with who ended up becoming the principal at a school in Oakland, at an underprivileged school in Oakland. And I asked him, because I was very curious, like, what's the challenge? Why are the kids from this school not ending up going to college? Is it funding? Is it access to good teachers? And he was like, it's none of those things. We're as well funded as any other school in the area. We are able to recruit a lot of great teachers because they really care about helping these kids. It's a culture problem. It's that these kids and their families do not value education. And so when they show up to school, they don't value it. They don't try. There's no pressure on them when they go home to do the homework and assignments. And again, I get back to this question of like, how do you change someone's motivation? How do you get them to want to change, to want to engage in the community college that you want to provide them, which is a fantastic and potentially life-changing trajectory. I know my dad did the GI Bill, got him into college, totally changed his life trajectory. So how do you see the future playing out when, access to things like community college are being provided, access to tools to learn are essentially infinite? How do you get people to use them? How do you get people to actually move forward?
There's a lot in there. It is hard to change. There's some parents that and a lot of it is because of their own issues and their own struggles that they have that really don't encourage, motivate, and stimulate their children to do better. And that's where teachers, an area that I'm really concerned about now that now we're talking about a work component of Medicaid. Washington's talking about it and adding it. And one of the things people can do is volunteer work. And I think churches have dropped the ball a lot in society. I think the churches used to be kind of the center of the community. It was a place where families gathered. It was a place where there was encouragement and Sunday school and we've lost a lot of that. A lot of people are not involved in churches anymore. Children aren't taught and educated about service and serving others and having a servant's heart. And so I'm trying to challenge the churches to get more involved and to become a bigger part of people's lives and all of that. But I think that all of us need to be looking for how we can be that spark in a child's life. Having grandchildren and being around children and in our church and everything, I love it when I'm telling the kids something or explaining something and you see the spark happen. You see the light go on where they get it. Whether I'm showing my grandson how to do something and all of a sudden he does it and then he does it 50 more times because he's realized. I remember when he was learning to ride his bike and everything, and he brags on the fact that he never used training wheels. He learned that. He's got a little electric motorcycle that he could ride. He was riding at 3 years old or so, 4 years old, and so it's just I think that we collectively as society need to be looking for those areas. We need to look people that are struggling, and if they've got a child that needs something, that mentoring programs are good. YMCA does a good job. Boys and Girls Clubs do a good job. But we need to be modeling, and we need to put people in their lives that model success so they can see what it is, because I think most people want to succeed. Yeah. I know that I was talking to some men and about the fact that one of the biggest problems I see with government programs is it takes away the dignity and the self-worth. Yeah. And especially from a man. Men, I think, want to take care of themselves and want to take care of their loved ones. And if you take that away from a man, it's much harder for him, I think, to have the self-worth and the pride of being a man and taking care of him. I read a book a long time ago that It talks about his need. The book is His Needs, Her Needs. We give it to a lot of people that go through marriage counseling and stuff. And men want to hear "I'm proud of you," and women want to hear "I love you." And that we need to be thinking about what the needs are of each other and how to build. I want to try to build men up. I prayed with a group of men this morning, and it's a group of guys that I just all love and want pray for their health, pray for their families, and we need to do that more.
Yeah. Let's round back the conversation back on mental health. So, you've.
Oh, I thought we were doing that. I thought this was a counseling session. I thought we were doing counseling.
We can do that too. I am told by many of my friends that I'm annoyingly too pro therapy. So.
Look, I think every time we sit down with every time we sit down with someone, we're in therapy.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And in a way, like the whole point of therapy is learning how to interact as your whole self with someone and be open and talk about the things that are challenging. So, and I do appreciate you just bringing that to this conversation. Tell me tactically, like, how will you know if this $835 million investment and the work that you're trying to push forward, how are you going to know in 10 years if it worked and if it was the right strategy?
If I don't have any involuntary commitments in the hospitals, that's one of the go. Suicides, I want to see suicides especially among young people, go down. Young people and our veterans are big concerns for me. We're still at about 21 veterans a day in the country commit suicide. I think a lot of that has to do is we train these young men and women, and then we don't untrain them.
Yep.
We just bring them back and put them in society, and we don't really help them disengage. So we got to figure that part of it out. We got to convince people just don't use drugs. I mean, don't ever try it. Don't ever experiment with it. Your life will be much better. I think we need to encourage people not to drink as much, not to gamble as much, not to be careful about addictive behaviors. And I, as I said, as a spiritual person, I think we need to reintroduce and tell people that they need to think what's important to them. And a lot of young people that I talk to tell me they're spiritual, but they're not religious. And then I try to drill down on that, and a lot of them don't know, and I tell them I do know. I can tell you what's missing from your life, but you need to examine it, and you need to do it. And I encourage people, pick up the Bible and read it. God has a way of if you open the Bible and just look at it, He'll reveal Himself to you.
What gets you most excited right now with all of the work that you've done in mental health? Like, what do you? I've had more conversations about mental health in the last 2 years than probably any time in my career. People have acknowledged that mental health is a big deal, and it's not just health care and mental health. Yeah.
That, I tell people you are not healthy until you're mentally healthy, and I talk about mind, body, and spirit. And the one I said first, mind. Mm-hmm. I think your mind is something you have to take care of. Your body is something and all these are biblical concepts, but the spiritual component of us is so important. And you are not going to be healthy if you don't deal with all three of those.
Yeah, it very much resonates. And I think it's very easy in the medical model that we have today where 100% of the focus is on body.
Body and body image.
Yeah.
You think about it, most everything we're doing now, I was listening to an article about influencers, and I challenge people, think of who the influences are in your life. I challenge all the young people that hang around me as far as interns and folks that come to my office to visit. And I always ask them this question, who are your 5 closest friends? Because you're the average of your 5 closest friends. And I said, so think about it. Think about who you let in and out of your life and who's influencing your life. Are they bringing up your average, or are they lowering your average? And that's something to think about. We need to be real careful about what we allow in our lives.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think about this a lot. And I have a lot of friends who I think are very ambitious, but the ways in which you're ambitious are important. You can be ambitious in chasing something that will make you miserable. Yeah. You can be totally unambitious in chasing something that is very simple and makes you blissfully happy. and the game that you choose is really important. And I very much resonate with this idea of body image, and this is sort of one of my great fears about when people ask me what is my hot take about mental health. My hot take is that I'm actually I think it's very unfortunate we're in a crisis of young people right now. However, I do think this could be the best thing that's ever happened to our society, because so many people are forcing to look themselves in the mirror and actually for themselves come to these answers about how to live, how to be good to themselves, how to be good to other people. But I do worry about the body image piece, because especially young girls, they're just plugged in so early and so tightly to visual representations of models, of beauty standards that are very unattainable for most people. And I get very scared thinking about that. And then especially you pair that with things like Ozempic being widely available, and a culture of normalization around taking those drugs for people who are not struggling with real physical health.
I learned something. I was talking to a group, and I had not heard that there is, and these are, it's on some of the sites and stuff, young women that measure their thigh gap. And so what they do is they lose weight to try to increase their thigh gap. But this young lady had gotten down to 83 pounds and was having kidney failure and a bunch of other issues, simply because there was a site that promoted young women measuring their thigh gap. And I thought, how crazy is this, that we're letting people on the internet through an algorithm, because somehow Google or whoever was running the site that it was on, lets this group exist that promotes destructive body image for young girls, because most of them are going to be teenagers, young teens, tweens, and all of that. And we saw a lot of that happen during COVID when everybody was on remote. But one of the interesting things that I've heard is that a lot of young people now are choosing to get flip phones rather than smartphones. I think that's encouraging.
That's cool.
That they see that just what you said earlier about the phones in schools and stuff, when we were talking about that they're making a conscious choice to not have that much data and information and availability.
Yeah.
Now, I'm guilty. I use mine. I had to use it for directions to come here. Your appointment was on there. Christy, who handles all my scheduling and takes care of our office and all. I'm addicted to it because I use it every day in work and everything else. But we all need to be monitoring what we use.
Man, talk about the level of self-awareness for a 15-year-old to want a flip phone rather than an iPhone. That's
Isn't
pretty
that
cool.
neat? I think it's neat. I think, and the fact that they're wanting to use these pouches and not have their phone with them all day, and I think we're seeing the pendulum is starting to swing back.
Yeah, I always say that too. Like, the kids that we see, they know that they're struggling. It is not like they are unaware. The parents are probably more unaware than they are, but there is an awareness, and I think Jonathan Haidt talks about the collective action problem of this, where if one kid is the one person who doesn't have Instagram or the smartphone, they're left out of all their friends, and then that's probably worse for them. But if you got all the kids off of it at once, which I think is what the no phones at schools is doing, then everyone's happy. So hard problems to solve. But I think before we got on camera today, you asked me what I'd heard from other states, and I did mean it sincerely. I think North Carolina is really pushing ahead of many states in terms of the investment, the just like sheer willpower that people are trying to push forward when it comes to mental health and youth mental health. I want you to imagine a state senator at a state that is not making as many leaps and bounds, but who's really passionate about this problem of youth mental health or mental health more broadly. What advice would you give to them about how to actually start the conversations and start making progress to get the ball rolling on this?
First thing I would do is I would start going and visiting facilities. Before I was sworn in, when I was first elected, I just happened to know the head psychiatrist for Cherry Hospital, one of our 3 large mental health hospitals in the state. And I called him and I said, look, I want to be involved in healthcare. I've already talked to Senator Burgin, told him I want to be involved in healthcare, and mental health is something I want to look into. and work on, and I want to come visit you. So he invited me over, and I went over and spent a large part of the day at Cherry Hospital, and just talking, met with him, toured the hospital, met with some patients, and then visited with staff. So I had all the psychiatrists and he's head psychiatrist, and had all of them together and talked about. I said, tell me what's going on. Tell me what you need. Tell me all that. And I said, as a Baptist, I always say a 3-point sermon. So give me your top 3 things in order of importance. That's what I work on. So I said, give me 3 things that you need. The number one things was electronic medical records. They were still using paper records. In all of our state facilities, we have files with paper records. They're not electronic records. There's no other health facility in the state I mean, every hospital has either Epic or one of the other programs, but they all have electronic medical records and all that. And so I've been there 7 years. This fall, all of our 19 facilities will have electronic medical records.
There we go.
I was able to get $70 million appropriated for it, and been working on it with Epic and all the other folks in the state. And so this fall, we're going to Cherry Hospital, and that's where we're going to roll it out first. And I'm going to take everybody that wants to go. I've asked the governor and everybody else. I said, I want everybody to go and be there, because it's been a 7-year, and that's so. But anyway, the question is, what would I tell them? Go visit facilities, go talk to people. They'll tell you exactly what you need to do. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to sit and ponder in a dark room. Just go listen, and people will tell you exactly what they need. And they'll usually tell. There's a lot of people in this area and arena that are working, and they'll give you really good information and really good ideas.
I feel like underlying so much of your philosophy is this like very obvious and palpable curiosity that you have.
I do. I want to know why.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
I don't. I guess it's a God give. I think anytime somebody says something or does something, I want to know, why, and if it doesn't work, why didn't it work, and is there a simple solution? Because most things are really, they're not really complex. It's just, how do you get it to your lowest denominator, and how do you fix it? And you've seen my big idea, the big Edison light bulb on the canvas.
Yep.
I think I lit it up to show you how it works. We're working on early child care now. I'm one of the co-chairs, me and the lieutenant governor are co-chairs on this early childhood task force that the governor put us on. And I take that poster to that canvas print to every meeting. And, I tell them, when we come up with a big idea, we're going to light it up, and because we need to acknowledge those things, and then we need to take them. And then I was told years ago that God gives you $1 million idea if you take it to its full conclusion, and he gives you one every day. And so I'm always looking at what are the ideas that if you took it to its ultimate conclusion, what it would do and how it would succeed. But at the end of the day, I just want people to be healthy and happy and enjoy their lives and take care of their families. And I think North Carolina is a wonderful place to live. Got a fantastic, today is beautiful outside. It's going to be a great weekend. We're so fortunate to live here, and I want to do my part.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that there are people like you who are on a mission to make this the healthiest state. Thank you for all of your time, your effort, your energy. As someone who has unexpectedly made their life about mental health, it's an honor to know that there are people who are much further along who are also as passionate. So
You mean older? You mean much older?
I say that not meaning anything other than the generational divide that sometimes occurs with mental health, again, for reasons like CBT being invented in 1981, I think. I don't expect my parents or their generation to really understand in the same way that the young kids and myself and our generation, the millennials, have grown up to be. So I don't mean any jest there.
Look,
but
I'm teasing you. I tell folks, I think I needed to go through a lot of things to get to the point where I'm at today, and I think everybody else is on a journey too. And I just don't want people to end up in a place where they don't want to be. And I think part of that is continuing discussion, continuing curiosity, And then I have this philosophy that I say all the time, and that's the word retire is not in the Bible. God does not intend for us to ever retire. We're supposed to do different things in different seasons. So if you ever hear that somebody says that I've retired or anything, you say, well, I know that's not true. He's just doing something different. So, but I appreciate your interest and your curiosity, and keep asking the questions, and keep focusing on what recovery looks like, because I think that there's recovery in everybody's life if we give them the right tools.
Yep, totally agree. Awesome.
Trampolines, not safety nets.
Wow. We coined that today.
Today, right
I heard
here.
it first.
It's
Awesome.
been great.
Thanks, Senator Burgin. Appreciate it.
It's always good to see you.